What you call that noise?
The XTC Podcast.
XTClimate.com.
What do you call that noise?
What do you call that noise?
Welcome, all you neo-ancients, to What Do You Call That Noise, the XTC Podcast. My name is Mark Fisher, and I've just got back from Stroud in Gloucestershire and the Neo-Ancients Festival, a weekend of talks, concerts and shamanic rituals in celebration of folk culture. There were appearances by Griff Rhys, Bridget Christie, Jarvis Cocker and Jeremy Deller, but the reason XTC fans turned out in force, and it was lovely to see so many friendly faces there, was to see producer Hugh Padgham talk about XTC's English settlement with co-director Ben Wardle. And as your dedicated podcast host, I was on hand with my trusty tape recorder to share it with you. That's coming up in just a moment. But first, let's warm up with some of your music. Every episode, we invite you to share a song you have written that has been inspired in some way by XTC. This time, it's the turn of Robert Lawlaw, who is wearing his inspiration on his sleeve with Andy Had It Tough. Here he is to tell us about it.
What do you call that noise?
Hi Mark, it's Robert Lawler from Kildare in Ireland, a proud knight in shining karma. I just wanted to share my song Andy Had It Tough about an amateur songwriter who accepts the fact that he lacks the talent and conviction it takes to write a song as good and as complex as River of Orchids by Andy Partridge. So I hope you enjoy it.
Working from home, he thought it might work out. Linking up paper clips, grinding through the hours. Cold sweat, tension and doubt. This state will never give out. And dreams that he'd never given up, of writing songs like Andy. A river of orchids in his head, and a fifth of brandy. Safer options in the end, bills and mortgage to contend. Andy Partridge had it tough. He decides out his shed and tunes his old guitar. He's got a few ideas, he's just seen Get Back Now. But rhyming silver is hard. The 3-chord trick gets him so far. Later he's a star with a single string solo. Drum loops almost keeping time. He designs a new logo. He wakes up later in a sweat and listens to his musical wreck. Andy Partridge had it tough. He decides a river of orchids in his head, and a fifth of brandy, safer options in the end. Bills and mortgage to contend, Andy Partridge had it tough. He decides, Andy Partridge had it tough. 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 Andy Partridge.
What do you call that noise?
Lovely. Thank you very much, Robert. And you can hear more of Robert's music at robertlawlaw.bandcamp.com, and I'll include a link in the podcast details so you get all the spelling right and everything. If you have an XTC-inspired song, I have to say that there are quite a few in the queue, but if you want to add to the queue, feel free to let me know at mark@xtclimelight.com, and I'll line it up. 3 cheers for the brilliant supporters on Patreon who make this podcast happen. They're very, very, very wonderful people. If you like what you hear and you'd like to join them, it's very, very straightforward. You just pop over to patreon.com/Mark Fisher and decide on your level of support. And there are 3 levels you can choose from. And if you opt to be a knight in shining karma, I'll read out your name at the end of each episode. And a reminder, as ever, that you can buy your copy of What Do You Call That Noise, an XTC Discovery book at xtclimelight.com. And you'll also find details there of all the podcasts. So now it's time to visit the Lansdowne Hall in Stroud, and you'll see a reference to the Lansdowne Hall in Stroud during the conversation. So we're at the Lansdowne Hall in Stroud, where Ben Wardle, who is a lecturer in music business and creative industries at the University of Gloucestershire, introduces us to producer Hugh Padgham for a celebration of English settlement.
What do you call that noise?
Good evening and welcome to the Lansdowne Hall, and can we have a very warm welcome for Mr. Hugh Padgham, please? I'm going to start with just a brief apology about our tardiness. We've just been kind of hopefully sorting out some issues with, ironically, with the technology. Sound issues. Yeah, sound issues, which is kind of what we are talking about today. So, just to start off, Hugh, I've involved you beyond sort of grilling you about what happened over 40 years ago now.
I know.
Long time ago. But we, it's right. Kind of, by definition, the fact that we've got about 35, 40 minutes, we will give you some time to ask Q&A, for a Q&A.
1 minute for each year.
We've got a roving mic for that, and we are going to be having a playback of English settlement, but we're going to have it in the dark, and hopefully we'll have all the wonderful things that Hugh and the band put together.
Shame they're not here, really, isn't it?
It is a shame they're not here. That's the elephant in the room, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Perhaps we'll get on to that.
You wouldn't get them here all together.
Can I ask you why?
They just wouldn't. For certain members of the band.
Just a little bit. I mean, my interest in this, I'm a big XTC fan. I've had involvement 3 times with Andy Partridge. Nothing, of course, compared to Hugh, but when I was an A&R person, he produced some tracks for me back in the 90s. I also had a spell of managing his daughter's band for a little bit, which was bizarre. And lovely to go around and sort of ask to manage his daughter, rather like asking for his daughter's hand in marriage in a way. Quite an XTC concept. And then finally, I did some interviews with him when I did a podcast a few years ago. So, yeah, big fan. And I'm very honoured to be speaking to Hugh now. So, to a bit of context, Hugh, we're talking about 1981, which was clearly, 43 years ago, a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it was a huge year for you. You were kind of defining yourself as the kind of top production go-to guy at the time. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it was weird, yeah. I was lucky to get a job at this studio. It's called the Townhouse Studios in London, which is where we did Black Sea, Drums and Wires rather, and then Black Sea. And I'd known that it was owned by Virgin Records, and well, you'll see in a bit, they originally made the Manor Studios, which was just outside Oxford, and that's where Virgin's first big hit, Jubilee Bells, was. There it is. Sadly, it's not a studio anymore, but...
what is it? Is it a hotel now?
No, I think it's privately owned.
Right.
Yeah. And Richard bought it in 72 or something. I think it cost £25,000. No one wanted big houses then because there was the big fuel crisis. Anyway, mustn't get carried away here. Anyway, so that I knew them, the Virgin lot, through. I'd worked in two other studios in London.
The Townhouse you were involved with, right?
Yeah, I first worked in a studio called Advision, then I worked in a studio called Lansdowne. Spelled, I think it's spelled differently.
With an E on there.
Yeah. Is it with an E or?
See, that's the quality. That's the quality of guest.
Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But I was very keen. I liked the Virgin Records lot. I liked the sort of bands that were on their label. Where I was at Lansdowne Studios, I started engineering. They always put you on sort of, small sessions to start with, and one of my first sessions was recording the vocals for Roger Whittaker. And I just decided I really, wanted to get into something, the cooler bands.
Was Roger Whittaker on Virgin? Was he doing like guest vocals with Faust?
No, it wasn't at Virgin, it was at Lansdowne.
Oh, I see, sorry,
And it was a good place to learn, I have to say. We did do some good other stuff, but anyway, to cut a long story short, they announced they were building a studio in London, which opened in late 1978, and I got a job there as a junior engineer. I was 24, I guess, maybe nearly 25.
I've got a youthful picture of you, probably perhaps a little bit. There we are. Oh, yes, God.
Yeah. Anyway, the studio very quickly became a really happening place. You didn't have to be on Virgin to use the studio, and quite soon on. In fact, the first session I ever engineered there was Derek and Clive's third album called Ad Nauseam.
I have a copy in a sick bag. Yes.
Anyway, I then met a guy called Steve Lillywhite, who produced XTC's Drums and Wires and Black Sea, and I was the engineer sat next to him. And then we also got asked to do Peter Gabriel's third record, so we did that. That's how I met Phil Collins, and that's another side.
Just to remind people with bad memories like me, is the third record the one with the scratching on?
No,
Melty Face.
No, it was the Melty Face.
Melty Face, right.
But anyway, so that's basically how I met XTC. Mm-hmm. And I think on English Settlement, they obviously quite liked me. That's why they asked me to do it. And I think they thought, well, Hugh could do just as good a job as working.
Well, I've got a quotation from Andy Partridge from 2002. We tweaked that it was Hugh who was getting all the great sounds and we were making the music. So what did we need Lillywhite for? We thought we'll get us Hugh, go in the studio, and it would be a great album. So
Yeah. Well, I always, they're such great guys, and in those days, they really were a band.
But of course, also there was the kind of minor issue of the fact that you had just produced Face Value and this enormo hit for Phil Collins, as well as back in the summer of '81, you were doing The Police, Ghost of the Machine.
Yeah.
And also just before you went into the manor with them, the Genesis Abacab.
Actually, I made a list here. That was earlier in the year.
Okay.
Then I
Good. Although probably
then I did.
Gentleman over here.
But you know, it's so weird because when you're working with these bands, you don't have time to sort of think, you know, that it might be a hit or whatever. I was only 25, and I think I was 26? 26. So I was quite young really, but I thought I was quite old because I started working, you know, as a T-boy in a studio when I left school, aged 18.
So you were kind of
So that was
a man and boy situation that was going on. That sort of man and boy in Hugh Padgham.
Well, by the time I started working at Virgin, I was 24 or 5. So I'd been doing it for 6 years, and I thought that was you know too long. I look back on it now, and I realised that I was quite young. But it was quite when you're booked up to do records like that. So I did Abacab with Genesis, and then Goes to the Machine with the Police in Montserrat, and then all quite close together. Then the English Settlement. It's quite stressful actually, because if for whatever reason one album takes more time than you thought, and it's like XTC had booked the manor for X date, and you're like stuck in the Caribbean still, and thinking, what happens if I don't get back,
Although obviously that's a good setup, isn't it, really? You're kind of stuck at Montserrat. What must be a pain for you.
Yeah.
You didn't overrun with the police, though, did you? I mean,
No. Somehow they all managed to, get done. But I mean, working with English Settlement, it was not very long, 6 or 7 weeks.
I mean, again, my research tells me there was 6 weeks. It took 6 weeks to record, and you started in October. So it would have, and I think Colin Moulding has memories of Bonfire Night, so you would have gone.
No, I do remember it was the winter time. I mean, we worked our asses off, we really did, and they always felt that studio time was, money. The thing with the manor, which was great for them, but not great for people like me or my assistants and stuff, is that you book that studio by the week. Normal studios in London you book by the day or even by the hour.
Did that result in you pulling all-nighters then?
Well, almost, yes. And so the idea of XTC having a day off when they, obviously the record label was advancing them the money to pay for it, but they thought we're paying for it. So we basically didn't. The only time that we had off was Saturday nights, and even then we'd spend Saturday night in the studio, and Andy and the bands, they'd sort of bring in a big crate of beer and start drinking it, and then they would start playing covers, like Led Zeppelin covers and all that, and Andy being, I mean, he could literally crease you up, he's so funny. And I remember one that they did a Hendrix cover, and he called it does anyone remember who Jimmy Edwards was? He was a comedian with a big handlebar moustache. And so he said, and now we're going to play whatever song it was by the Jimmy Edwards Experience. So he always had a fantastic, or still does, has a fantastic humour.
Yeah.
And he's just so talented.
You can't imagine Sting doing that in downtime somehow, can you? Well, you're the man to ask.
But the funniest thing was that when he got really drunk, he would take all his clothes off. And
this is Andy, not Sting?
No, this is Andy.
Just checking.
No, Sting would always take his clothes off. because he was so keen for everyone to see
how ripped he was.
how ripped and honed his body was.
Yeah.
But Andy did it. He'd strip down to his underpants, which he'd then clench up. Do you know what?
See, this is the sort of interview I was hoping we'd get to. I'm glad that,
Japanese sumo wrestlers.
Yeah.
So he'd sort of make himself look like a Japanese sumo wrestler. He jumped around the studio. It was quite mad, really.
Yeah.
But we're getting off subject. That was like really. That was one evening a week. Otherwise, it was full on. And I would say a normal day was probably 14 hours, something like that.
Wow.
I would think. I mean, the only good thing about being at the studio was you could literally roll out of the studio and go to bed.
And it was all catering, you didn't have to worry about.
Yeah.
So hot meals and everything.
Yeah, all the meals. I mean, it was like being in a hotel like that. And the girls who worked at the manor were famous really
for cooking and amazing.
Yeah. They always had great food and they were very flexible because you wouldn't stop at 7 o'clock.
Of course. Yeah.
Anyway, it was a really great place and a really good vibe.
I mean, everyone seems to have had a lovely time. I mean, all members of the band seem to have lovely memories of that. And I just wondered why. It sounds incredibly hard work, despite the nice food and the occasional sumo kind of comedy moments. But how? Yeah, tell us how you managed to keep that momentum and the morale up.
Well, the great thing with XTC, going back to this thing of time is money, is that they were, the three albums that I worked with them on, they were very well rehearsed and prepared. And so when they came into the studio, a lot of their parts, the songs, Andy would have the lyrics written. So often I've been in the studio and it comes to the singer singing and he hasn't written the lyrics yet or whatever, And so they were very well prepared. So
does that story about Andy sort of worrying if he broke a string and he'd have to use 10 minutes of expensive studio time to put a new string on and tune his guitar? So yeah.
I don't know if that's true. I don't remember that being that. He probably made that story up. He was probably feeling guilty about it. But we just. I don't remember being under any undue pressure. We just worked hard, and thank God that they'd worked their parts out for most of the songs really well. So it was a question of just recording it, I suppose. But I mean, obviously we edited some of the songs down. We changed structure a little bit.
Moulding says you never try to dictate a sound like some producers can do.
Well, yeah, I try and sort of mould myself to the group I'm working with. I mean, a friend of mine, Trevor Horn, who's a great producer, he's much more sort of autocratic than I am, and he bosses the people he's working with around, and he probably ends up being, it's a Trevor Horn record, not a Frankie Goes to Hollywood record, or whatever. I mean, he's lovely, Trevor, but I'm much more of a sort of chameleon, and I try and fit into the artist that I'm working with.
I've got a possibly contentious quotation from David Gregory who says, and this is possibly fighting talk, I don't know, the band had already done the production but needed someone to get it onto tape and make it sound as good as possible. That's the...
Oh, thanks, Dave.
And tonight's special guest.
Well, Dave, with all due respect, doesn't really know how to make a record. Maybe he's a great guitar player, but I don't know how good a producer he is or engineer. I mean,
production is an interesting word, though, isn't it? Because everyone has a different understanding of what the heck it is.
Well, yeah, I remember Sting saying, "What's a producer?" You know, and but it's the sort of thing of taking all the sounds and making them sound like a record, and a record that sounds good on the radio or as loud as another one is on the radio. And of course, in those days, everything was analog. You know, digital was in its very early infancy then, so we recorded everything analog, which still sounds better to me. And you know, what Dave's saying is correct in the sense that they've worked out pretty well most of their parts, so there wasn't sort of messing around in the studio trying, what shall I play there, or
it sounds to me
what shall I play, you know, here.
You were very good at the actual sound, the specific, getting the right sounds, and you were quite particular about once that sound had been recorded, that was it. You didn't want to kind of.
Yeah, well, I worked with them on two other records where I was only doing the knob twiddling, so to speak. And I mean, in those days there were two sorts of producers really. Ones that came up through engineering, which was in my case. In fact, when I started producing, there weren't that many people around doing producing and engineering. Most producers came from the other way, who came up through being musicians, and got into producing that way.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's very much a delineated thing, an engineer or a producer, and then it.
Yeah, I mean, back in the 60s, the producer would hardly talk to the engineer, and the engineer would be wearing a white coat, you know, if you worked at Abbey Road or at Decca or somewhere.
Yes.
And but anyway, I kind of at the studio Lansdowne that I worked at, I had a very good mentor who told me how, or showed me, because I did a lot of sessions assisting him, and he would show me how you mic up a flute, or how you might mic up, I don't know, a wobble board, or you know, something. So I kind of learned quite, and he made me read books and things. Seriously?
Really?
Yeah.
Force you to read books?
Yeah. There's one, I've still got a copy of it. It's called the Art of Sound Recording or something. It tells you all how different mics work and
that's brilliant, because obviously these days
so it's quite good to know.
Young people go on sound and music production courses and learn it that way, so you actually learn on the job.
Yeah, there weren't really any courses in those days. And so I kind of learned, I shouldn't really use the word proper, but I knew how to get the best out of the sounds that they were making. But what we would do is experiment maybe with different sounds on the amplifiers and stuff. So I tended to, Andy would play obviously one guitar part and Dave would play the other, and I tend to have them left, right in the mix. If you listen on headphones or whatever, you can hear it much more. And we would try and differentiate between their sounds. So if they were in a different sort of sonic space, you could hear each part better. Mm-hmm. So we'd fiddle around with that. So maybe Gregory's playing a 12-string electric and Andy would play an acoustic, or if they were both playing 6-string electric, maybe Gregory would play a Gibson through whatever amp, and then Andy would play a Fender or his Ibanez or something. So we would mess around with getting the different sounds, even though their parts were well worked out.
I think Partridge described it as a session, or rather an album, where everyone was kind of in a love affair. with a new instrument.
Oh, okay, with the ministry.
Well, maybe there's more I can find out about this, but certainly David Gregory had a new Rickenbacker, a new 12-string.
Yeah.
Colin bought yet another fretless bass, which they were all kind of rolling their eyeballs up to the ceiling about. And then, but Partridge had an old acoustic, and Dave Gregory tells this story about he was playing the kind of Eddie Cochran riff on No Thugs in Our House on this slightly cheap Italian acoustic, and you lost it. Someone just went, we need to get a proper guitar. Is that something that, again, it might, the time may have...
I know he bought a Martin. Because,
he remembers going to London with some money from the management to go and buy a Martin at your instruction.
I don't think it was my instruction. I probably said, Martin's really good, check them out, because they record well or whatever. Anyway, he did get one in the end, and he loved it. And Gregory already had some really good guitars. They didn't have a dearth of equipment at all, even though they liked to pretend they were sitting on the bones of their arse, Well, they were, but I guess any money they had, they did, spend on instruments. But they had a couple of synthesizers, and one of them was this monophonic synthesizer called a Korg. And the reason they got it was because it was shop soiled and cheap in the music shop in Swindon.
That's just so XTC.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But I think, does Moulding still own that? He still uses it, apparently.
Does he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a few years old, the piece of press I read, but yeah.
Yeah.
But they were also...
And he did have these very odd... He didn't like to sort of conform in terms of his bass guitars. And I kind of wish now... What am I trying to say? That the bass on some of XTC records, he's an unbelievably good bass player.
Yes.
Incredibly. I mean, literally one of the best I've worked with, I think. And he had no idea that he was...
Is that true? He did. I mean, no, he's so creative.
I know. But he would buy a fretless bass guitar just to piss the rest of the band off.
Did he really?
Yeah, and some of them didn't actually sound that good. And had I, 40 years later, I kind of know, obviously, more than I did then, in terms of, and I would sort of, I've discovered bits of equipment since that would have made his bass sound better, I think. Although when I was listening to this record before we came in tonight, I can distinguish most of the bass lines, I think.
They're pretty, they're pretty good. I wanted to actually talk about some of the key tracks. I say key tracks, there's probably a room full of people who have their own idea what the key tracks are, but...
Does everybody know the album, by the way?
That's a good question, yeah.
Does anybody not?
That's a good question as well. Who doesn't know the album? Could you just quietly leave? That's great.
In other words, most people do, by the way.
I think so, yeah. So we're talking to people that are aware of these songs.
Yeah.
So I've already I checked with you about whether you remember anything about this, but I'm interested to ask you nonetheless so people can hear your answer about Andy's song Jason and the Argonauts, which is very much he claims was the only song he wrote about being on tour. Which at that point, during the making of the album, as I'm sure a lot of people in this room know, he was very at the forefront of his mind that he was sort of fed up with it and really would have preferred not to have had a big tour ahead of them, which they did have. But do you have any recollections of that subject ever being discussed between band members?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No, I don't. I really don't. I was reading in that book that you told me where it's called...
Complicated Game?
Yeah, does anybody know that?
Yeah.
And he says that he had sort of brought up the idea with the other members of the band individually, but I don't ever remember it being discussed. The weird thing about making records with bands is that when I first met them, we did a single called Life Against at the Hop, and then we did Drums and Wires, and that was done literally in 4 weeks, I think, a month, maybe a few days more. Black Sea, probably not that much more. So when you're working so intensely with musicians and you're not sort of going out to dinner every night or whatever, you actually don't know them nearly as well as the roadies, for instance, or something. When they're touring. So I would do 4 or 5 weeks with the band, and then they'd go off for a year on tour, and come back and do the next one. It was exactly the same with the Police. When I did 2 albums with them, and they were arguing in the studio, and I would try and say, stop arguing, and they say, well, you don't know us, Don't start telling me what to do, And so,
in some respects, that's the producer's job, is to kind of get the thing delivered on time for the record company. So it's kind of is your job to stop the arguing and guide the.
Well, yes, it is in a way, but if you've got personalities like they were just going to F off. But it wasn't the same with XTC. But what I'm trying to say is that Andy would not have, he wouldn't have confided in me, I don't think, his problems. I mean, I never knew that he, from an early age, he was on Valium or whatever it was.
Yes.
Was it? And I had no idea. Anyway, so after after we finished English Settlement and they went off on tour, and the record company were really excited, and they were going to be headlining, and they were going to hopefully make it in America. When I heard that Andy had sort of had a nervous breakdown or whatever, he had some sort of breakdown and decided he didn't want to tour again, it was like, bloody hell.
It was a shock to you.
Yeah, it was a real shock to me. So anyway, I had no idea the answer to your question.
Well, I think that's interesting in itself. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that was not kind of shared with you. Just to talk about the music side of of Jason and the Argonauts. I am interested. Maybe no one else is, but I'm interested in this. There's a long instrumental passage which we'll hear later that uses flanging.
Oh yes,
and. Can you explain what that is for those that don't know? And there's also, there was a bit of kit called the bell flanger that was used. I don't remember that.
Well, does anybody know about flanging?
A few hands.
It can also be called phasing. I think one of the first pop records where it was really prevalent, or I remember, was the Small Faces at Stroud Park. All girls start going. It's like a sort of jet landing and stuff, and it was invented. That's not the right word. It was sort of someone came up with the idea. Basically, because I don't want to get too technical because it's really boring.
I'm not going to ask you about the gated snare, Hugh.
No, good. Wrong album. You basically take a tape record, your song that you want to phase or flange. I'll tell you why some people call it phasing and some people call it flanging. You record it into 2 other tape machines simultaneously. Then you stop and you play the 2 tape machines that you've just recorded onto in sync simultaneously. So you have your assistant, doink, press the play, and you're listening to both machines, and if you're lucky, you get them playing together, literally in sync with each other. And then if you slow one of the tape machines down slightly, or speed it up even, you start to get this effect, because I'm trying to explain it, sort of just...
It's great so far.
is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So you get one that's sort of slightly out of sync with the other, and I mean we're talking milliseconds here, and it starts making this sort of whooshy, crazy, psychedelic-y type sound, and then, well, while you're doing this, the first tape recorder, presuming that you've got 3 tape recorders, the first tape recorder you use to tape into the other ones, you now have on the output of your console, so when you're doing this phasing thing, you've then got to record it onto another tape, on tape machine. So you basically need 3, stereo tape recorders to do it. And then once you've got the phasing bit you wanted, and the reason it's called flanging sometimes is because the spool of tape has got has a metal flange on the top and a metal flange on the bottom.
Oh, okay.
And they call it flanging because you touch the metal flange to slow the tape recorder down. You sound quite technical. Am I describing it very well?
100%.
Anyway,
fantastic.
At the end of the day,
you get a bell.
At the end of the day, you then had to edit into your original master, which was the one you recorded into the 2 other machines. And so to do a bit of flanging in the middle of a song took forever, basically. Well, not forever, but it took quite a while. And then around the time, a year or 2 before we made this record, somebody invented an electronic box that did the same thing, and you could literally just plug it straight over the track you wanted to have flanging or phasing, and there it was instantly.
And lots of people were saying that this was one of the greatest examples of old school flanging.
Yeah, well, it actually worked really well. I mean, it was called a bell flanger, and that you could either get it in a pedal, I think, or you could get it in a rack mount, which we had in the studio. And of course, because it was so easy, to use compared to the old-fashioned real way of doing it, we used it all the time,
Very good.
But back in those days, there were so few effects like there are now when you're working in the digital domain, where there's literally millions of things. Back in those days, we didn't really have any digital reverbs. Everything was sort of analog, and so you had to be a lot more sort of inventive, I suppose, to come up with ideas.
And it's interesting when we were talking about this because of your putting together what we'll be listening to a bit later, just in the edits, and it hadn't even occurred to me that there was these crossfades you had done in the final mastering, and of course doing crossfade, as we discussed these days, a child could do it on their iPhone.
Yeah,
but that was not the case.
No, in those days you had the end of the song on one tape recorder, the beginning of the song on another tape recorder, and you'd then again have to have a third tape recorder. So you put you play one tape and you work out roughly, how much you want it to overlap. Obviously, you're plugging these tape recorders into the console.
Yeah.
You have to make sure all the levels are right. You'd get that together with test tones and things like that. And then you would record the crossfade onto your third machine. And then you would edit the bit that you'd made, the crossfade, into the original masters. And we're very, very strict at using original masters. So as soon as you made a copy, the quality would degrade. But if you're doing it at the end of a fade or at the end of a song, you kind of, you didn't really notice because you're recording it onto a new machine anyway. So anyway, doing a crossfade could take 2 or 3 hours, and nowadays it would take 2 or 3 minutes probably. Everything's easier with digital.
There's a lot.
The other big thing with digital, not that I want to get into digital, is, I mean, in those days we recorded on 24 tracks, analogue, 2-inch tape, and you often, producer's job as well was, say someone playing guitar solo, it's like, when's it good, the guitar solo? And he might play it 10 times. And in those days, you had to choose there and then pretty well, because otherwise you'd run out of tracks because you wanted to put other things like percussion or something on the other tracks. And so you literally had to sort of make decisions on the fly, whereas in the digital world now you could record 2,000 guitar solos if you wanted on one song and never lose anything.
Is this if you're comping something from the best parts?
Yeah. It's often called vocal comping as well, where you record several tracks of vocals and then make them into one.
And you would have been using a razor blade to kind of comp?
No, well, not comping, but editing.
Oh, right.
Editing, doing either flanging or chop. Say, I think there was a bit, the middle bit in Jason and the Argonauts was really long.
Apparently 2 minutes were edited out of Jason and the Argonauts, reducing it to a mere 6.
I know. So it was done literally by ear and slicing the tape with a razor blade and sticking the bits together with editing tape, like sticking plaster. And that was quite scary to when I say scary, it's an art that you had to learn, whereas in the digital world now it's just, your cats could do it pretty well. Everything's easier in the digital world, but it's not. I remember necessarily better.
It doesn't seem like that long ago to me, but it was end of the 80s, early 90s. People were still doing the razor blading, but it disappeared quite quickly once digital technology took over. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. Yeah. I'm aware that we are. We're coming up to 10 to 7. I know we started a little bit late. There's really so much to discuss, and I want to obviously leave some time for people to do some Q&As. I did want to kind of just briefly talk about Colin's tracks, because I know that you had said in other interviews that Colin had a cold during the recording of this.
Yeah.
And that possibly affected his performance on Fly on the Wall.
Well, I think it wasn't just Fly on the Wall. He did have a cold, I remember that. And obviously being so tight with time in the studio, with other artists, you might say, well, look, we'll have a week off until you get better, and come back. Because it's important, vocals the most important thing on a song. And it kind of, I do remember it stressing everybody out a bit. And I think he also had hit the cold on Runaways as well. And every time I got a feeling that I kind of mixed his vocal quite low in the mix on Runaways, because we didn't have any digital technology now. You could auto-tune, you could do all sorts of things. We didn't have any of that in those days. And every time I listen to Runaways now, I kind of think, ooh, I wish the vocals should be a bit louder. And then the backing vocal bits in Runaways.
Please Come Home.
Please come home, or whatever it is.
Yes.
That goes to the bell flanger as well, because I think we were trying to disguise the fact that his
So you flanged his cold out of existence.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
We used the flanger on everything that we could.
Tell us a little bit about Terry, because Terry is, in some respects, it's a mighty drum sound, and obviously that's partly what happened with the manor is that there was a stone room built there to emulate the one that was in the town.
Yeah, which was famous for the In the Air Tonight and stuff. Terry was basically a human drum machine, and he was also extremely funny, and I call him the human drum machine because Colin or Andy would sort of tell him what to play. I think, and I'm not sure how much of the drum parts, because I wasn't there in rehearsals, but I think they would just ask him, especially Andy, to come up with parts, and he would then learn a part, and once he learned it, he would just literally play it. And that's why he is a bit like a programmed drum machine, because he plays some incredible.
I mean, the drumming,
parts. But he's
roundabout.
He's amazing, amazing drummer in terms of his timing and so on and so forth. But we just used to joke that he was the human machine, and it never took that long to record the backing tracks for these songs, because they'd rehearse them and maybe we'd alter a little bit, and sound-wise, how the drum kit was mic'd up a bit in the studio. But once you press the record button, I don't remember him ever taking more than 2 or 3 times.
But did that mean that there was that perennial kind of drummer in a residential studio problem, that he'd done all his parts and then was getting bored because there was people agonising over the bell flanger for days, and he was finished?
Well, yeah, I do remember after he'd done his drum part, if in the evening we were overdubbing guitars or vocals or something, he'd drink a few beers and then sit in the control room and shout sort of profanities at everybody.
That's just what you want, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what he was like. He was so, he was incredibly funny, and what a character.
Fantastic.
Such a, the band just, for me, after English Settlement, when they stopped touring and that's all Terry wanted to do, really, was tour, I think. So as soon as they said, we're not touring, he said, well, sod it, I'm off to Australia. He had an Australian girlfriend and he went out to Australia. Funny enough, I saw him out there a couple of times because I worked out there with a band called Split Ends. But also another great band from that time.
Absolutely.
And to me, they never really sounded like, having known them and done 3 albums with them, they never sounded like the same XTC to me, even though they had, some great session drummers on the records and stuff. But anyway, there you go.
I'm aware that we're kind of coming into 7 o'clock. I've got, there's so much more we could talk about, and as I said in the disclaimer at the beginning of this, we're only kind of scratching the surface here. So I sense.
Do we want to talk? Do we want to play the record? If everybody knows it already.
Well, we are going to play the record. I hope we are. I have to say, one of the reasons why we started 6 minutes late is because we had a slight technical issue. I don't know. It seems like we fixed it now. There's a fun going up there. But I think before we play the record, should we have a few questions?
When I bought the album, it was the first album I bought, but actually, when I went out beforehand, I ended up buying what I thought was the album, was in fact Senses Working Overtime, the EP. Not realising that 12-inch EP was an EP and not an album. But it had Blame the Weather, Tissue Tigers, which are great songs, which never got the album, they were on there. Was there much of a discussion about which songs made the album, and how did you choose?
It's a good question. I've got a feeling Blame the Weather and Tissue Tigers may have been done on a different session, actually. I've got a vague feeling that might be the case. The big thing in those days as well was working out the order that the songs were going to be in on the record. And the only way you could really work out the order was to play the actual songs, so you'd make a copy of them or whatever. Nowadays, if they're digital files, it'd take you 2 seconds to whereas we would spend probably a whole day or longer trying to work out what would be the correct or a good order. And also, because everything was vinyl still in those days, you didn't want to have a really loud song on the inside of the record because physically the grooves, it goes around faster in the middle with it, so you have to sort of, you always wanted sort of not so loud things so you could keep when the cutting engineer could keep the grooves together. Plus, to get the best sound on vinyl, you didn't really want to have much more than sort of 22 or 23 minutes aside as well. So that's a reason why it became a double album, partly because we couldn't, no one could decide what to sort of take off, although the American release was only a single album because I think they couldn't cope with having a double album.
No, we had a double album in the States.
You did have the double album?
Yeah. In the original one, the 1981 version, when it first came out, was the textured cover double album. I still own it to this day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I never
There
knew
is
that.
definitely a truncated version that came out.
For sure.
Yeah.
And
Was that later?
That was it. Yeah, a different green. Like the cover was a different green, and it was smooth. It didn't have the texture and the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then the CD sequence was even different on top of that.
Oh, right.
So I'm a huge fan of the album, so I don't want this to come across as a negative question. However, if you had to leave one song out and it was down to you, what would it be and why?
What, off the album?
Nice.
Yeah.
Probably senses working overtime. I don't know, probably Fly on the Wall.
Really?
Maybe. I don't know, that's a hard question. It's a bit more lightweight. I don't know, let me have a look. I don't know, it's a difficult question.
I think you said your answer. Your flight's Fly on the Wall. Mr. Collins, Cold Strikes Again.
Yeah.
There's the famous story about the Beatles doing Please Please Me and George Martin saying, "Gentlemen, you've just recorded your first number one." When you were doing the album, did you all go around with senses and go, "Oh, bloody hell"? Or did it sneak up on you, or it wasn't obvious until it was all finished?
I think Andy thought that it was going to be a single, but I don't know if he thought it was going to be a hit single. I don't know, was it a hit single?
Yeah, XTC It was their biggest hit single, I believe.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter.
It got to 41.
I've only ever recorded one song that we were all told that it was a hit single, and the manager said if I effed it up, then I'd be in big trouble. And that was Every Breath You Take. That's the only song I've ever, recorded from right from the demo, and everybody said this is going to be a huge hit. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sitting next to John Walsh, and he swears by it, that XTC performed in Madison Square Garden. Is it true?
I've no idea, I'm afraid. Sorry.
I got another question about
as soon as they left the studio, I was on to the next project. I never knew anything. In those days as well, there was no social media or anything, so I had no idea where they were or anything.
They may well have supported somebody at Madison Square, the police or the old talking.
They might have done.
Yeah.
I got the police gig because of Andy Partridge when they were touring together. And they were on a bus, and Sting said, "We're looking for a new producer. Do you know anyone?" And Andy said, "Oh, well, bloke who does our records, all right? So, seriously, that's how I got to work with them. Right, sorry, next.
Yeah. Hi, that's a lovely talk, and it's very much the XTC. We all know a lot, I think, and if you remember, when I first met them, they were like, it was like being in Hard Day's Night, except it wasn't scripted. It was the greatest live comedy act you'd ever wish to meet.
Yeah.
I just want to defend poor old Dave a little bit there about the thing at the beginning. You know what he's like. He sent me a message this morning. I said I was coming, and he said, if there's anyone there who remembers me, please give them my best wishes. Dave is the master of the humble brag, it must be said. But I mean, can anybody remember, when did Wasp Star come out? What year was that? That's the one Dave walked away from. Yeah, well, Dave's been doing a solo album since then. And he's always talking about a solo album. It makes no difference, because as you said yourself, he doesn't know how to make a record. Now, could I, this is a question for you, Hugh, but also for the people here, the audience, would anybody here like a Dave Gregory solo album? And you, Hugh, would you consider working with Sir Dave? Cornelius, is it called Cornelius Plum? Is that Dave? I can't remember. That's it, Lord Cornelius Plum. That's cool, isn't it?
The mic doesn't work suddenly. Well, I don't know. I'd have to hear the songs.
Yeah.
I don't sort of. I'm too old to make albums now.
Oh,
really? If the songs were good, then yes. Go on.
No. We've met before, and I had a chance. I want to say again, thank you, because you've been an inspiration to me in my career and the things I've always wanted to be, like Hugh Padgham. I have a specific production question. You're known for some great snare drums and some great things. The snare drum on Yacht Dance, that beautiful echoing sort of piccolo snare. How did you get that song? What was the sort of inspiration in how it was crafted in the song? It's a beautiful fit in with the guitars.
Yeah. I don't really remember, to be honest.
Oh, really?
I mean, it's obviously a snare when the snare's turned off, isn't it?
Rotate top.
Sorry?
I think it was a rotate top.
Oh, it could be, yeah, it could have been. Actually.
Really?
Quite possibly was, yeah.
Okay.
But again, I wouldn't have done much. We would have made the sound in the studio, and I just would have, mic'd it. I mean, that was always my sort of kind of technique, really, was to try and get the best sound. Like if you've got a really good sounding drum kit, it shouldn't take very long to get a good drum sound. If you put the good mics in the right position and stuff. So I was never one for spending hours and hours on trying to get sounds later, sort of thing.
I was just going to say, my mic is not. I was just going to say there was one argument with you,
and he had one argument only, which was he wanted to add some compression to knuckle down, and this was the nearest we got to an argument. You didn't want to add any compression to it, so there you go.
That sounds like a pretty good going.
Well, I don't know.
6 weeks with XTC.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know, I can't remember that. I don't know whether he was talking about compressing the whole track. I mean, we've used compressors on loads of stuff, vocals, tape, and all sorts. So.
We've got a question from this gentleman in the XTC t-shirt.
No, I've not really got a question. I think it was the Cars they supported Madison Square Garden, is that?
Oh, could it be? Don't ask me.
It certainly wasn't me anyway. I've only just thought of a question. Which studio did you prefer, Townhouse or the Manor?
Ooh, I think probably the Townhouse, because, as I said before, at the Manor you were sort of locked into these really long hours. I mean, the equipment was great at the Manor, same company, so we had similar consoles and mics and all that sort of thing. So it was just really the Manor. I kind of got sick of. I did quite a few albums there. I got sick of it in the end because you just get absolutely knackered.
Yeah, you talked to me about the difference between analogue and digital. Of course, the album's been remastered subsequently. Were you involved in that at all? And can you detect any, because presumably that was done digitally, and can you detect much difference between what people are hearing now and something like Spotify compared to what you were back in the day?
It's a really good question. All this remastering thing is often record companies just trying to sort of say it's been remastered so they can re-release it and so on. I sadly, the original producer doesn't, well in my cases, because quite a few of the artists I've worked with have had reissues, and the only one who's ever asked me to be involved in remastering was an album I did with David Bowie, and he'd already died. So sadly, but I've got a friend who's a bit of an audiophile, and he reckons that 90% of the reissues don't sound better than the original. And I used to use a really good most of the time, really good mastering engineers either here or in the States. And if you got the original analog tapes, you were doing it off. And in those days, the producer would be sent test pressings to listen to and so on. I just they just don't do that anymore. So I don't know. I haven't AB'd English Settlement, so I hope the reissue's good, but.
Hugh, once a plug, so 20th of June next year, 22nd of June next year is the next XTC convention.
Yeah.
It's a fans festival, and you kindly agreed to appear.
Yeah.
Kindly agreed to come.
Yeah.
So can we plug that, everybody? If you look at your Facebook, if you look for XTC Fans Festival, then please join us for that. And the second thing is actually the question, which is, I'm pleased you mentioned about Terry, because it's his finest moment in the settlement. It's absolutely superb what he plays on it.
Yeah.
And my question to you really is, do you consciously look for strong drummers? Because, if you think of Stuart Copeland and Phil Collins and Terry, you've got quite a portfolio of quite amazing drummers, really.
Yeah. Well, I always think you can't have a good band without a good drummer in a way. It's a bit of a naff analogy, but I use it as like the spine of the human body. Everything hangs off the spine, and the drummer is the spine, and I just think it's so, nearly all the best bands have got have got good drummers in them, and it's really important. I mean, nowadays, I hate to mention the word digital now, you can fiddle around with them, to your heart's content, but back in those days, if you weren't any good, it wasn't any, just wasn't good. Good question, though.
Thank you. Yes, very good question. And all good questions.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
And thank you so much for Hugh Padgham.
I've never had that many people chat me before. It's really good. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
What do you call that noise?
Thanks very much to Ben Wardle for putting that talk on at the Neo Ancients Festival, and of course thanks to Hugh Padgham for agreeing to do it and being such good company. As you heard in that question from Liam Scanlon just then, Hugh has also agreed to appear at the 2025 XTC Fans Festival in Swindon in June next year, and tickets for that go on sale on the 22nd of June 2024. So you just go to the 2025 XTC Fans Festival page on Facebook for details. If you've enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please pop along to patreon.com/Mark Fisher and and show your support. Thanks in particular to the following Knights in Shining Karma who've done exactly that. Terry Arnott, Kevin Burt, Lorenzo Ciacci, Cale Corbett, Liam Duggan, Jamie Dunn, Alison Eels, Jeff Farris, Evan Fish, Leslie Gooch, Mike Grafe, Robert Graham, Camille Henry, Stephen Hope, Alan Hughes, Marek Kraus, Jesper Kumberg, Robert Lawlaw, Liz Lynch, Murray Meikle, Yusuf Murrah, Amy Parkinson, Mark Reed, James Reimer, Michael Sutcliffe, Steve Swift, Mark Thomas, Nigel Waller, John Wedemeyer, Lucy Verbitsky, and Martin Whitley. That is all for now. See you next time. Bye.